Hi everyone. I really didn't expect to be posting here, but I could really use some advice. My name is Jason, and I've been married to my wife, Emily, for about 5 years. We met back in college and things moved fast between us. She was fun, smart, and we had a lot in common. Our relationship always seemed pretty strong. At least that's what I thought. Lately, though, things started to feel different. You know when you get that gut feeling that something's off? It's hard to explain, but little things started adding up. Emily started coming home late from work, often saying there was a big project that needed her attention. She'd spend more time on her phone, and when I'd ask who she was talking to, she'd brush it off and say it was just friends or coworkers. At first, I didn't want to make a big deal out of it. I trusted her completely, but as the weeks went by, the distance between us grew. Our conversations became short, and she always seemed distracted. I started to feel like we were drifting apart, and deep down, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was seriously wrong. But I never could have imagined how bad things actually were. Everything came to a head last weekend. Emily mentioned she was going to a party that her boss, Todd, was hosting for their team. I didn't think much of it at first, but something about the way she talked about it felt off. She was vague about the details and seemed in a rush to leave when she was getting ready. I asked if I could come along, but she brushed it off, saying, "It's just a work thing. You wouldn't enjoy it." That nagging feeling came back, stronger than ever. Something about the situation just didn't sit right with me, but I didn't want to seem paranoid or controlling. I told myself it was nothing, but later that evening, curiosity got the better of me. I decided to check her messages. I've never done that before, and honestly, I felt terrible about it, but I needed to know if my instincts were right. I found a text from Todd. It wasn't inappropriate on the surface, but there was something about the tone of their conversation that didn't sit well with me. His message said, "Can't wait to see you tonight. Make sure you wear that dress again, winking face." My stomach dropped. What did that even mean? And why was Emily hiding this from me? That's when I made a decision. I was going to the party to see for myself what was really going on. I drove over to the address I found in their messages. It was a high-end bar downtown, a place I knew Emily's work didn't usually go for events. My heart was racing as I parked a block away, trying to calm myself down. Maybe it was all innocent and I was overreacting. Maybe I was being paranoid. But as I approached the entrance, I saw her through the window, Emily, laughing and standing far too close to Todd. I wasn't prepared for what I was about to see. As I stepped inside the bar, my heart was pounding. Maybe I was overreacting. I kept telling myself, maybe everything was fine, and this was all in my head. But the moment I spotted Emily, my worst fears were confirmed. She was standing near the back, talking closely with Todd. But this wasn't just some casual work conversation. The way they were standing, the way they looked at each other, it was too intimate. It was the kind of body language that two people have when there's something more than friendship going on. I tried to stay calm, but every nerve in my body was on edge. I decided to hang back, hoping to observe without being seen. At first, they were just talking, but then something happened that sent my heart racing. The group around them started to cheer, and before I could even process what was happening, I saw Emily kneeling down in front of Todd. The crowd's chanting grew louder. I couldn't believe my eyes. This wasn't just flirting or some innocent misunderstanding. It was something much worse. I pulled out my phone, shaking, and tried to record what was happening as evidence, but I didn't get far. Before I could capture anything, a couple of security guys noticed me. They grabbed me, took my phone, and pulled me into a side area, away from the main room. I was stunned, barely able to process what was happening. They tied me up to keep me out of the way, and I could hear the crowd still cheering behind me. The next thing I knew, Todd walked over, casually tossing Emily's shirt at me like it was some kind of twisted joke. "You're going to watch this," he said, his voice dripping with arrogance. I felt completely powerless at that moment. My wife, someone I had trusted with everything, was right there, and I couldn't do anything to stop what was happening. But what Todd didn't know was that I had something up my sleeve, something I kept with me from my military days. And I wasn't going to just sit there and watch. As I sat there, tied up and furious, I realized I had to stay calm if I wanted to get through this. Emily and Todd were too caught up in their moment to notice that I was already working to free myself. With the small tool I kept from my military days, I started cutting the ropes they had tied me with. My hands were shaking, but I kept at it, focusing on what needed to be done. Meanwhile, Todd was still basking in the attention of the crowd, completely unaware that things were about to change. Emily, well, I didn't even recognize her at that moment. This wasn't the woman I had married. The person I loved was gone, replaced by someone who had no respect for me or our relationship. Once I got myself loose, I stood up and took a deep breath. I wasn't going to cause a scene. I wasn't going to do anything rash. I just needed to confront Emily and make sure she knew that I had seen everything. She needed to face the consequences of her actions. I walked straight toward them, and when Todd saw me coming, his smirk faded. I didn't say a word. I just looked at Emily, waiting for her to acknowledge what she had done. She froze, and for a moment, it looked like she might try to explain herself. But the truth was already out in the open. I didn't yell. I didn't lash out. I just calmly told her that we were done. The marriage was over, and there was no coming back from this. Todd tried to say something, but I cut him off, telling him he wasn't worth my time. The look on Emily's face was a mix of shock and guilt, but at that point, it didn't matter anymore. The damage was done. Leaving the bar that night was one of the hardest things I've ever done. I felt numb, like I was walking in a fog. My mind was racing with everything that had just happened, and my heart felt like it had been ripped apart. How had it come to this? How had my marriage, which I thought was solid, fallen apart so completely? For the first few days, I couldn't stop replaying the scene in my head. Emily, kneeling in front of Todd, the cheering crowd, the arrogance in Todd's voice when he threw her shirt at me. It was all too much to handle. I wanted to be angry, but mostly I just felt heartbroken. Emily called and texted, trying to apologize, but I wasn't ready to talk to her. I needed time to think, to figure out what I wanted to do next. I still couldn't believe that the woman I loved had betrayed me so deeply. I had trusted her, believed in her, and she had thrown it all away for a fling with her boss. Eventually, I realized that as much as I loved her, I couldn't stay in this relationship. The trust was gone, and once that's broken, it's almost impossible to get it back. No amount of apologies could undo what had happened. Part 6. The decision to move on. After days of avoiding Emily, I finally sat down and thought long and hard about what I wanted. Could I forgive her? Could I ever trust her again? The answer was clear. No. The betrayal was too deep. I couldn't live my life constantly wondering if she was lying to me, if she was seeing Todd or someone else behind my back. When I finally spoke to her, I told her it was over. She cried. She begged me to give her another chance, but my mind was made up. This wasn't something we could fix. Our marriage had been destroyed, and there was no way to rebuild it. We agreed to a divorce. It wasn't an easy decision, but it was the right one. I deserved better than someone who would betray me like that. It was painful, but I knew it was the only way I could start to heal and move on with my life. As I went through the divorce process, I had a lot of time to reflect on everything that had happened. In some ways, I felt like a fool for not seeing the signs earlier. Looking back, it was clear that Emily had been pulling away from me for months. I had just been too trusting, too blind to see what was right in front of me. But at the same time, I realized that this wasn't my fault. I had been a good husband, and I had done everything I could to make our marriage work. Emily was the one who chose to betray that trust. She was the one who had let our relationship fall apart, not me. As much as it hurt, I started to accept that this was just part of life. People change, and sometimes relationships don't work out the way we hope they will. It's painful, but it's also a chance to learn and grow. In the months after the divorce, I focused on rebuilding my life. I spent more time with friends, picked up some hobbies I had let go of during my marriage, and started to rediscover who I was outside of my relationship with Emily. It wasn't easy, but each day felt a little bit better. I also realized that I didn't need to rush into anything new. This was my time to heal, to process everything that had happened, and to figure out what I wanted in the future. I knew I'd eventually be ready for a new relationship, but for now, I was focused on myself. Looking back on everything, I can say that as painful as this experience was, it taught me some important lessons. The biggest one, trust your gut. If something feels off in your relationship, don't ignore it. I spent months convincing myself that everything was fine, but deep down, I knew something was wrong. Secondly, don't stay in a relationship where you aren't respected. I deserved better than what Emily gave me, and I had to learn to value myself enough to walk away. Finally, healing takes time, and that's okay. If you've been through something like this, give yourself the space you need to recover. Surround yourself with people who care about you, and don't be afraid to put yourself first. If anyone else out there is going through something similar, just know that you're not alone. It's tough, but you'll get through it, and you'll come out stronger on the other side.